Good afternoon and welcome to the Society's first career webinar of 2021. We've been on hiatus after January's meeting and have switched webinar platforms in the meantime. This is my first time hosting a webinar on Zoom, so please bear with me if things go awry. Today we will present I Heart Failure, Discover and Recover from Professional and Team Loss, brought to you today by the American Astronomical Society and the Society's Committee on Employment. Let me introduce myself. I am the notoriously camera-shy Diane Frendak, the Director of Membership Services at the AAS, and I am pleased to guide you through today's hour-long programming. Let me start with some generally known webinar items. Everyone in this webinar is in listen-only mode. However, you're strongly encouraged to share your questions by typing in them in the Q&A or in the chat, if I set that up correctly, which I don't see it, so I might not have. Finally, please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the AAS website within the next few days. I just want to let you know that there's a few abstract deadlines coming up for the AAS summer meeting. That's going to be next week, next Tuesday, so get them in. For our summer meeting, which will be in June, and the DDA meeting, which is the Division on Dynamical Astronomy, which will be held in May. Both meetings will be virtual. Finally, if you go to the AAS website, you can find a lot of career resources, such as access to recorded webinars, the sign up for one-on-one career consultations with our speaker today, and a list of summer REU and intern opportunities, the job register. So go where the arrow is pointing. Next up is my introduction on today's speaker, Alaina G. Levine. Alaina is an award-winning entrepreneur, international keynote speaker, STEM career consultant, science writer, corporate comedian, and author of the book Networking for Nerds. Alaina writes Your Unicorn Career, a careers column for the AAAS, and is a regular speaker and consultant for the AAS. Now, without further ado, I'll hand over the webinar to Alaina. Alaina, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Diane. Welcome, astronomy stars, pulsars, and gamma ray bursts. I'm so excited to be here today. As Diane, my good friend, the notorious Diane Frendak said, this is our first webinar of the year, and I love the fact that we chose to do it on failure. Let's work together today so that we are not failing, but doing a great job and giving you information that will be helpful to you in your career. As always, as you heard from Diane, this session is being recorded, but I want to invite you to join us on social media. You are welcome to live tweet this talk and quote anything I say. You're welcome to take screenshots and post anything that I say. If you decide to put something on social media, tag us, let us know so that we can promote you as well at AAS_office, hashtag Your Unicorn Career, and at Alaina G. Levine. And I would also like to invite you to join me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn is Alaina G. Levine. I use LinkedIn as the primary way that I send out free career planning resources. So articles and tip sheets and templates and all webinar invitations. So if you join me on LinkedIn, no need to customize the invitation. I can send you that information. So let's talk about failure. And by the way, I am going to be monitoring the chat the whole time. And so if you have some things that you would like to share, if you'd like to add questions, throw your questions in the Q&A, throw your comments in the chat. I want to hear from you. How about a quick roundabout? How many of you, throw it in the chat, how many of you have experienced a professional failure, let's say within the last year? Me? Throw it in. Do I have any yasses? Do I have any yasses of you having experienced a failure? I certainly have. And so today we're going to talk about how we can discover, recover, and move beyond the failures that we have had. So I see a few yasses. I see a hell yas from Michael. Yep, many from Leonardo. And Robin, you said yes too. So thank you for pointing that out. We can celebrate our failures, and that's part of what we're going to be doing today. In fact, I want to give you a spoiler alert. Many of you have seen me speak, so you know I like to give you a hashtag spoiler alert. Every challenge, every professional loss, every failure that we have, we are going to reframe it in our minds as a gift for us to make us stronger and more agile, efficient, effective, creative, productive, and aware, to help us to solve the next problem and to cushion against or prevent other failures that we will be engaged in. And so I really do think about failure as something that I'm trying to learn from. The failure that I experience is something that ignites my creativity. It encourages me to think about what I can do differently, better, or more, as my counselor said. And I'm going to tell you about that in a few moments. Now, take a look at this photograph. I'm a runner, and I like to run half marathons with my running buddy, Peter Bateman, my high school buddy. We've been running together for many years now. And here we are running a few years ago at the Philadelphia Half Marathon. This is us crossing the finish line. And I'd like to ask you to throw this in the chat. Do you see anything wrong, quote unquote? Do you see anything off with this photograph? There's actually two things in this photograph that are a little bit odd. Do you see what they are, Diane? Do you see anything that looks odd to you?
I'm just digging the tie-dye. So
Tie-dye.
I don't know. I always think it's weird that the finish line, well, I guess people need to know that the finish line is there, but it looks like it's pointing the wrong way.
I know what they do is they always have that photograph. They always have that banner there so that you can get a photograph of yourself crossing the finish line with the name of the race above it so that you can clarify that you actually ran that race. All right, so I'm going to tell you what's wrong, quote unquote, with this photograph. And Michael, you just got it. You're not being rude. Michael says there's no one around you, which means either you're first or in the back part of the race. And Michael, you are exactly correct. We literally came in last. That is not being rude. That is a fact. That is data. We came in last at that race. And Leonardo, you mentioned a very, thank you, Michael, respect. Respect to you as well. And Leonardo, you mentioned the other thing that I wanted to highlight with this photograph, the time that I ran 13.1 miles or walked it, or in this case, crawled it and hysterically cried it in 4 hours and 14 minutes. And I did the math before our session today, and I calculated that's about 19 minutes and about 19 and a half minutes per mile. Now, why is this picture here and why is it relevant to our conversation? So a couple of things. First of all, for many people, particularly runners, fellow runners or walkers or rollers, many of you may think of me coming in last and me coming in at 19.5 minutes per mile as a failure, quote unquote. And in my opinion, it was not a failure. It was not a failure. Other people may view it as such. They may view it as such for themselves if they came in last and this was their timing, that this was a failure for them. To me, this was not a failure. This was something that I could do different, better, or more later on, and I will come back to that. But for me, every race that I do, and we haven't had races, of course, in the last year because of COVID, but when we get back to races, for me as a runner, sometimes I'm able to do really, really well according to my metrics of success. Sometimes I can run really fast. Sometimes I have a personal record. Sometimes I have a very joyous and strong run. Sometimes I just enjoy looking around at the people and the sights as I'm running. And other times I am in pain, physical pain, emotional pain, spiritual pain. This race, me and my buddy, we were unable to physically move any faster. And we were so slow that there were people who were coming in way faster than us. We came in last. I view this not as a failure, but I view this as a lesson, as an opportunity for me to learn what can I do different, better, or more. I also go back, when I think about races, I go back to what my goal is for every single race. And my goal for every single race is to have fun and to finish in that order. I don't think about time. I don't think about strength. I don't think about speed. I think about having fun and then I'm going to try and finish. And if I can do those two, to me, that is a success. So in this race, as you can see, that is the finish line. I am jumping up for joy and dancing across the finish line because I will always metaphorically and physically, if I can, dance across the finish line in celebration of my finish and me having fun. And this is the message I want to clarify for you, that other people may view things as a failure. You don't have to. And if you are learning from it, if you are gaining skills from it, if it's making you stronger for the next opportunity, for the next race, for the next hill that you will climb, there is value that you can gain out of it. So I just want you to think about that. I'll come back to this idea. So let's talk about failures, because especially in the last year with COVID, you and me, we most likely had a lot of failures. I had a lot of failures. This time last year, I had lost, I estimate to be between 80 to 90% of my income for the year, because as a professional speaker, all of my gigs, as you know, were in person. And within the last few weeks of February to the beginning of March, all of my gigs disappeared. So this was a failure. I don't know, was it? It was a challenge. Definitely it was a challenge. It was a professional loss. And I had to navigate it. I had to manage it. And I will talk to you more about how I did this. But there are many different types of failures that you and I will experience and have experienced, particularly in light of what happened over the last year. We may not have gotten X. X could be a job. X could be a promotion, a certain types of salary, or a salary increase, or a fellowship, or an award, or an opportunity. We might have lost our job, might have lost our money, might have lost our opportunity. We might not have achieved a particular goal. In other words, solving the problem that we had in mind that we were going to solve. We might not have met our expectations or our perception of what expectations are. Thinking about the race, what is the perception of expectation there? Failures in the professional space can be tasks that we didn't solve, problems we didn't solve, jobs, fellowships, awards, opportunities, promotions, goals, dreams, what you need, what you want, what you perceived as needing and wanting. It's all of these. And I would never tell you that what you experience is not a failure, nor would I ever tell you that what you experienced is not a success. Much of it is perception. If you lost a job this year, if you were on the academic job market, and this time last year, after an entire year of interviewing, the job, the university or the research institution or the mission said to you, we have to freeze hiring, and you were not going to be able to bring you in after all, that's not necessarily a failure of your making. It's a failure of the system. And what I see when I think about failure is I see a lot of overlap between professional loss and what we perceive as a failure of something that we were unable to achieve. There is loss, there is failure, there is challenge. Oftentimes they're even the same thing. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is overlapping across all three of those. But my opinion in general, failure can be fabulous. And I want to encourage all of us to embrace our failures, the failures that we engage in and the failures that we perceive are happening to us, like losing a job. And I want to talk to you about why failure can be so fabulous, because every failure that you have gives you an opportunity to be more innovative, to be more creative. When I lost all of those jobs last year at this time, I was hysterical. I started eating a lot of cupcakes and I went for a run to clear my mind. And that's when I started to think about, what can I do differently here that will enable me to get money? Honestly, I needed income, but will also enable me to solve a new problem for my constituency, for the community that I'm a part of, or to solve a problem in a novel way for the community that I'm a part of. And I realized that I had a couple of value propositions to offer my community. First of all, I had a lot of experience in giving webinars. I had been doing digital events for many, many years, so I was very familiar with and had expertise in digital platforms. I also had knowledge of and expertise in topics that would be relevant for the community. For example, networking from afar, career planning in a crisis, virtual interviewing. And so I reached out to my clients, my former and current clients, my network of contacts, even cold emails to people who I had never had any interaction with. And I sent to people, I want to see how I can help you solve a problem. I want to see what I can do to help you be a resource for you during this challenging time. And I described what I could do to help. And I offered to be of assistance. It gave me the failure of losing all those jobs, gave me an ignition, a fire in my brain and my heart, and honestly in my wallet, to move forward and to think innovatively. What else can I do? What can I do that's better, different, or more in this situation? And it sharpened my skills. It gave me stronger abilities in marketing myself and communication. It allowed me to better understand the ecosystem. It gave me abilities in business that I hadn't really sharpened in the past. And it gave me a whole group of people that were now new people, part of my networks. In other words, I got a lot of benefit in responding to that quote unquote failure. Now, did the other parties that I interacted with and connected with, did they get something from me too? Yes, they got my expertise. They got me giving webinars. They got products that they were able to promote to their students, their postdocs, their members, their staff. They got connection with the constituency. In exchange, I got a lot of benefits. I also got paid. In other words, we created a win-win because we were trying together to create a situation where we were providing value to each other. I was looking to help them solve a problem. They were looking to help me solve a problem. That's the beautiful thing about failure, is that it causes us, it really just thrusts us forward out of necessity to find new ways to be innovative. And if you think about failure in terms of the community of entrepreneurship worldwide, you should know that when venture capitalists invest, when they give money to entrepreneurs, they are looking for serial entrepreneurs in general. They love people who had been involved in multiple startups, including startups that have failed, in part because smart VCs, venture capitalists, know that not every startup and not every entrepreneurial idea is a unicorn, something that can be valued at $1 billion with a B. They know that not every startup and every entrepreneurial idea is going to be valued at $100 million or 100 million yen or 100 million euro. They know this. They also know that if you fail in your first startup and you learn from it, and you can demonstrate to me as a VC that you have learned from it, you are going to be successful the next time when I invest in you. In other words, you are going to show me that you've learned from the failure, you've gained skills that will allow you to move beyond this, and it shows me that you have learned from the failure on someone else's time and dime. In that case, I am going to be more likely to invest in your enterprise, somebody who has failed once or even multiple times, versus somebody who has never failed before in a startup environment. This is the lesson. But the entrepreneurial ecosystem is not the only ecosystem where failure is embraced. I wrote an article a few years ago about 3M, the materials company, and I learned in talking with the scientists and engineers who work for the company, interesting information about how the company itself views failure. They have a very innovative culture. They encourage employees, particularly in R&D, research and development, to take on and to pursue projects that are not necessarily tied to their job function. This is called the 15% rule. It means roughly that you have 15% of your time that you can work on in your own projects. And interestingly enough, the 15% rule is actually what led to the dawn of Post-it notes. It led to the innovation in the adhesive and in the use of a piece of paper with that adhesive that led to $1 billion industry. So they are very open to their scientists and engineers and their staff being innovative. They also make it clear that they know that you will not always be able to be quote unquote successful with this idea. Either whether it's you working for 15% or for the 85% of the time that's supposed to be tied to your job responsibilities. They know that you won't be successful all the time. So they encourage their employees to take risk, invite challenge, become challenge agents, and pursue the challenge, knowing that when you choose to pursue challenges, even if you fail, you can learn something that will benefit yourself and, more importantly, as a refers to, as it concerns our corporate environment, it will provide value to the organization. So they recognize that you may make mistakes, that you may fail. They say, okay, learn from it and just move on. And so I think a lot about 3M, and I wish more and more companies and organizations and even universities were more encouraging of that type of environment. Throw in the chat if you know of organizations, whether it's universities or companies or even telescope missions that you have had interactions with that do encourage this type of innovative thinking, that encourage challenging the status quo, even if it can lead to failure, as long as failure can lead us to innovation later. But I've had other experiences in my life that have led to me being successful. Not every single one. I don't want to sell you or tell you a rosy, romanticized picture of failure here, that every single failure I've had or every single failure you will have will lead to a Shangri-La of flowers and cupcakes and lots of money and lots of prestige and lots of Nobel Prizes. It doesn't work like that in the real world, as you and I know. But I do realize that there are many things that we can actually gain from failure. For example, when I was at university as an undergraduate student, I wanted to become a resident assistant in the dorm. And I did the whole process to do that. And it was a 9-month process. It started with an application, letters of recommendation. I believe there was a pre-interview. Then there was a class that we had to be in where they observed us in team building and leadership and project management environments. Then we had a post-interview. If you made it through that entire process, you were pretty much guaranteed at least an alternate spot to be a resident assistant in the dorm. And I did this whole thing. And I got my letter at the end of the whole process. And instead of saying, hey, we're going to hire you to be an RA, or hey, we're sorry we couldn't hire you, but you can be an alternate, I got a, hey, you're not an alternate, you're not being hired. Basically, they were saying to me that if all of the students at the University of Arizona, where I was a student, had transferred to Arizona State University up the road, and there was literally no students in the dorms, they still would not want me watching the empty dorms. That's how bad it was. And I was like, OMG, you guys, I just spent 9 months trying to get this job. I could have created a human child in that entire period of time. Instead, I have nothing to show for it. I was really mad. I thought to myself, is this a negative? Is this truly a negative? And I thought about it, and it took me a while. And honestly, I think this particular failure took me a couple of years to actually dissect it and think about what could I have done better, different, or more? How can I learn from this failure? And what I realized was there were 2 things that happened in this experience. Number one, when I got in that class and I was being observed, guess what? I should have done more research to understand the culture of being an RA and the culture of the dorms. And I knew that they wanted people to be part of teams. And whenever in the class they asked, does somebody want to lead this team? I love leading teams and I love volunteering. So I always volunteered. But because I didn't understand the culture, they assumed every time I volunteered, which was every time, because I volunteered every time, they assumed that meant I wasn't going to be a team player. And that was my mistake in not understanding how the culture manifests and how people interact with the culture. I still could have been my authentic self, but I could have been less, I could have volunteered less to be the leader to show that I am a good team member as well as somebody who is appointed leader. The other thing that happened from that experience was I found out that one of my letters of recommendation was written by my RA, who I trusted at the time. Turned out it was a negative letter. I mean, literally, she wrote, don't hire Alaina. It wasn't lukewarm. It was, do not hire her. And what I learned from this experience, besides pulling my hair out of my head because I was so furious and furious at myself for trusting somebody who clearly was stabbing me in the back, was how to better identify people who are trying to stab me in the back. It gave me a valuable lesson that there were hints and allegations, as Paul Simon would say, that I could see prior to me asking her to write that letter, that she would be a negative influence. So in this case, I was actually happy that I didn't get the job, because this would not have been the place where I would have thrived. And it would have, and that clarified, the experience clarified it for me. But it also gave me those valuable skills. When I was laid off, I used to work for the University of Arizona. So after I graduated from the U of A, I worked for the U of A for about 13 years. And in 2008, I was informed I was being laid off. And this was, of course, very distressing to me. I had literally grown up on that campus. I had been there since I was 17 years old. It was the rug being pulled out from under me. Now, I could have known, I should have known. It was the time of the Great Recession. The program I ran was on soft money. We had run out of money, and I was laid off in a cost-saving measure. But in the end, what happened to me was that it thrust me forward to try to have to be more innovative in how I was going to make money, in how I was going to run and organize and lead myself through my career. It thrust me forward and caused me to think more positively about what I could do for clients. And it gave me courage to reach out to more of people in my network to say, let's talk. Maybe there's something I can do for you. And that was 11 years ago, 12 years ago. No, excuse me, 13 years ago at this point. It's enabled me to launch my company full-time. I already had my company, which I was doing part-time, but because of the layoff, I was able to do it full-time. So there are many, many positives associated with failing, and we're going to talk more about that. But I would say that in a world without failure, you have no risks, you have no innovation, you have no new novel solutions, there's no growth for individuals, teams, fields, and organizations, communities even, there's no advancement, and indeed there's no success. And Leonardo, you have a great point, and I want to read this. The committees that award telescope observing time definitely do not like risky proposals. Any potential risk, no matter how innovative, is seen as a negative point. And Leonardo, I'm really glad that you brought that up, because it emphasizes the point that I was just trying to make about the RA job, in that we need to understand the culture of the community in which we operate. And if the telescopes, when you're asking for time, if you know that the culture of the telescopes, the different missions are such that you have to not be innovative in certain ways, if you want to get this time, you have to make sure that you clarify that you understand that culture, that you can work and still solve problems within the context of that culture. And it may not necessarily be easy to do this, but when you do, when you actually show them that you can operate within their culture, it allows you to gain that time, which then allows you to think more broadly about what you could do next, which could lead to innovation. It can lead to something really exciting and new, and another Nobel Prize for you. When I think about thinking about things in a new way, I'm reminded of the story of Shamrock Farms. Shamrock Farms is a dairy located in Arizona, where I live. I believe they may have a national footprint now across the United States, but they're very, very well known in the state of Arizona, probably in the Southwest as well. In the 90s, they had been going to car manufacturers. And my understanding of the story was that they were literally begging car manufacturers to have cup holders that were square shaped so that they could sell, so Shamrock Dairy could sell cartons of milk that you could individually, individual cartons of milk that you could take on a road trip with you in your vehicle. They wanted the square shapes. And you know that all the car manufacturers basically laughed them out of the room. And they were like, are you nuts? Get out of here. That's nuts. We are not going to change it from a circle to a square. Get out. So what did Shamrock Dairy do? They started thinking innovatively. Instead of saying we failed, we'll never get into individual servings in the vehicles, they started thinking more innovatively, more creatively. What can we do within this culture, within this community, within the framework of what we've been given? What can we do to get our products into the hands of consumers and into the cars? Why aren't we creating a circular shaped bottle? Instead of a square shaped carton, let's institute a cylinder that can be put into the circular cup holders within cars. And they did this and they created this entire new product line and revenue stream. And I know that they were innovative within the entire arena of milk and milk products for individual servings, particularly on the road. That is taking a failure and turning it into a positive. As I mentioned, failure and loss are sometimes the same, or they're perceived as the same. And what I have found is that we can process failure through the lens of processing loss. When I was laid off in 2008, and I left, my contract was able to be, fortunately extended for another year. And then I actually left the university in 2009. When I left, I was experiencing a loss not unlike any other type of loss that we might have. I'm not comparing losing a job to losing a family member. Absolutely not. They are completely different, but yet are they? When I lost my mother 3.5 years ago, it was a shock to my system. My heart exploded into a billion shards of glass, each one more painful than the next. And over the last 3.5 years, I have had to develop a system to process that loss. As I developed that system, relying, by the way, on my STEM background, my degree is in mathematics, and I also studied physics and a little astronomy as well. I utilized that background to develop a series of what I called grieving rules that helped to pull me out of this pit of despair of loss. And I began to realize that I had not processed the loss of losing my job in a way that was effective, in a way that would allow me to move beyond the loss itself. I was still concentrating on grieving the loss because I had never effectively grieved it and mourned it at that time. And I used the grieving rules that I developed for myself to process my mother's death to help me process the professional loss that I had had years and years before. And then I realized that these same rules could be utilized for any failure, any loss, any challenge that I have. And so I think about, I'm going to give you those grieving rules in a moment, and hopefully you can develop your own grieving rules too. But what I want to think about in terms of these issues is that there are many, many failures that you will have in your life. You've had them, you're having them now, and you will have them. I think back to not only the resident assistant, but not getting the grade I thought I deserved, I almost didn't graduate on time. I literally had to beg my mathematics professor in my final semester to give me a D as in donut or donut fail, because if he didn't give me that D, I would get an F, and I had no more money for any more classes. I had to graduate on time. If I got an F, I would not graduate on time. I haven't gotten jobs and awards and fellowships and opportunities I've applied for. I lost jobs and gigs, particularly in the last year. I've been assigned tasks that I didn't succeed at. I've been laid off. I've been fired many times. These are my failures. What we have to do when we fail is to always remember and retain the facts. Now, before I go into this, I want to point out what Robin was saying. And Robin, I appreciate your point here. You say that it strikes you that the cartons are paper-based and biodegradable, where circular containers on plastic are not. Any thoughts on how to use failures in a way that doesn't exacerbate future issues? That's my fear, that one failure will just repeat itself and get worse. Robin, thank you very much for bringing that up. And I really appreciate how well you articulated this important point. It's a very timely point. How can we make sure that we don't repeat our failures individually, and more broadly, how can we make sure that we don't cause more tragedy, more negative impact within our field, within our community, within our larger globe, within our quadrant of the galaxy? I think back to the story that I have heard about the guy who invented the little pods that you use for coffee, right? Those little pods, I forgot exactly what they're called off the top of my head, I forgot. But you know what I'm talking about, those little one-serving pods where you put it in the coffee maker, you get the coffee from that one pod, and then you throw it out. And he openly talks about how he wishes he did not invent those pods. Yes, thank you, the Keurig pods, the K pods. He wishes he had not invented that because of all of the environmental damage that it had caused and continues to cause. We cannot necessarily predict what an action we will take can lead to in the future. I could imagine that if we're going to create something that has, for example, a plastic footprint, then that's not biodegradable, that will negatively impact us. And I think part of learning from our past experiences and failures, and also, since many of you know that I am a huge proponent of networking, a huge aspect of networking is learning as much as you can about our ecosystem and how it operates, and gaining insight and wisdom from our community. I think a huge part of learning from our failure and learning from our community is identifying measures that we can take that might not necessarily be the right measure to take, that it could lead to a potential failure for individually or a larger challenge within our community, like the K-pods, like the non-biodegradable plastic drinks. So I think what we can do is, the only thing we can do is to aim to always do the best that we can and learn from past experiences. So I don't unfortunately have an answer for you, Robin, but I can say it is something that should be at the forefront of our mind, to aim to question our actions to make sure that we are making the right choice. The reality is, unfortunately, Robin, and for all of you listening today, is that we will never necessarily know all of the information that we need, all of the data that we require to be able to make the most informed choice. But that's part of also analyzing how we navigate failures. Many years ago, I was offered the opportunity to co-author an article, a journal paper, and it would have been my first journal paper. So I was very excited about it, but something told me it didn't feel right. My gut instinct said this is not going to be right for me. And in the end, I chose not to do it, to the disagreement of my top mentor, who told me, of course, this is great. This is going to be great for you. This is going to lead to X. This is going to lead to Y. Positive, positive is what he was saying. To me, it did not seem right. I didn't do it. And you know what? I have no idea whether it would have led to something positive or negative for me. But in that moment, my gut told me this was not the right opportunity for me. And I didn't choose it. And for that moment, I was very happy I didn't. And in retrospect, knowing how predatory publishing works, and also how exploitive work works, where people exploit other people for their time and their expertise and their work without engaging them, without paying them, or properly compensating them. This moment in time to me felt like it was going to be exploitive. Now I better understand exploitive work practices, and I can see that whether or not this would have been exploitive or not, to me at that moment, it felt like it was going to be. And I made the right choice because my gut told me that it could be exploitive. So it's the kind of thing I'm thinking about. So I think, Robin, we can all do ourselves a favor by also not second guessing ourselves as well. But a lot of the wisdom that we gain to decide on whether this is a right choice for us now or in the future is based on our own experience of the previous failures that we have navigated. So when we fail, we want to retain the facts of who we are, the type of person you are, your values, your priorities, your morals, the type of professional you are, and what you've accomplished, your skills and abilities and talents and knowledge. We actually can benefit from even going back and taking a look at our CV to see what it is that we do that is really strong, to remember that. Because what happens with a failure is that it tricks us into believing fake news about ourselves. So to better understand, to better cushion ourselves and gird ourselves against this fake news onslaught from our own brain, we have to look at the facts and be completely honest with ourselves about the truth about us and the system in which we're operating. So complete honesty is going to be very important if we are going to recover and navigate beyond failure. Being honest about yourself, with yourself, and being honest about your team, your organization, and the culture, and collecting as much data as you possibly can about yourself, the system, the culture, the challenge that you took on, the failure itself. What was happening before the failure? What happened during the failure? What do I feel? Note I said that word. What do I feel after the failure? What did I observe after the failure? What are the ramifications of this failure? What are the lessons from this failure? It really takes a lot of trusting your gut. A gut instinct is not something that you can measure. And I know as astronomers, astrophysicists, cosmologists, and planetary scientists, you love to measure. You love data. I love data too. There's nothing better than being able to measure a black hole. But the thing is that your gut is almost like a black hole. It is absorbing a lot of information, a lot of data. Actually, it's not exactly like a black hole. It's more like, I'd have to think about it. I think in some cases it's like a gamma ray burst, because when it telegraphs, when it communicates with the rest of the universe, the gut instinct is incredibly bright. I mean, you know, gamma ray bursts are the brightest objects in the cosmos. And so I think in a certain respect, the gut instinct is like a gamma ray burst, because even though we're not exactly sure what powers it, we do hear it, we do see it, we do feel it. And I wrote an article about this. And Diane, do you mind throwing into the chat a link to this article for Physics Today about trusting your gut? I think the article is called Trusting Your Gut is the Best Gift You Can Give Yourself. It was a whole article I wrote about how you can identify and really trust your gut instinct. When you are recovering from failure, not only does it take gut instinct, but it also takes ignoring the haters, the people, quote unquote, the people around you that are saying, do this, don't do this, or saying, if you do this, you will ruin your career. If you don't do this, you will not ruin your career. I had advisors telling me that I have to go to graduate school or I was going to be a failure. My mathematics advisor made me feel like a failure because I wasn't going to graduate school. This is a part of the haters community. You have to separate yourself from that and ignore it. It also involves learning, understanding, and empathy, particularly of yourself. Being compassionate, being self-care, providing yourself with self-care, but being compassionate for yourself, that you are making the right choice and doing your hardest and doing your best in the moment. It involves recovery and discovery from failure. It takes hard work, it takes planning, it takes networking and building and accessing and activating your strong networks. It also takes the ability to see the bigger picture for yourself, your team, and your field. And it even takes negotiation skills, negotiating with yourself and perhaps others, and an appreciation for the failure and the challenge and what it will teach you. That it also gives you an appreciation for yourself, that you did or will do the right thing for your team in the moment. It also takes an appreciation for your authenticity, for who you are as a person. So please give yourself a break and recognize that when you're dealing with a challenge or a loss or a failure, you will have flexibility and adaptability. And part of that honestly comes from being an astronomer, an astronomy educated professional. You have that ability. Failure and grieving a loss and grieving a failure is what my grief counselor, Bobby Reel, says. What could I have done differently, better, or more? That has become my mantra when I am dealing with a failure. What could I have done differently, better, or more? I use this for my personal loss with my mother, and I use this with my professional losses now. But I also use a series of rules. So I want to give you these rules. These are my rules that I came up with for grieving loss, for failure, dealing with failure and loss in a professional circumstance. But quite frankly, they absolutely parallel the same grieving rules that I use and have used to grieve and mourn the loss of my mother. And I suspect that these grieving rules will help me for any type of loss or failure that I will have in the future. So these are some of the rules that I have used. I used them. I really did rely on my mathematics background to develop these rules. You can use this set of rules as a template for yourself. You can use these, you can develop your own, but I think this might be a first step in recovering and discovering and moving beyond a failure and a loss. So first of all, do you remember the first rule of Fight Club? We do not talk about Fight Club. Well, the first rule of the grieving rules is that I acknowledge that the rules exist and we will stick to the rules. No matter what happens, we will stick to the rules. Number two is we clarify the existence and acknowledge the existence of a loss or a failure. This did happen. I lost this job. I thought I was going to get this grant. I thought I was going to have this time on this particular telescope, and I did not get it. Or I did not get all of the grants that I applied for, all the jobs that I applied for. I will acknowledge that this failure is not in my head. It actually exists in the real universe. Number three, I will always, always, always aim to not lose myself. I found this incredibly difficult because when I was in the pit of despair, and it really felt like a dark, deep, black hole of a pit where no light or anything can escape, the deepest, darkest black hole that I was in when I was in my deepest mourning, my deepest grief, it just was like a nightmare that never ended. To get out of that pit, I had to remember not to lose myself, that I wasn't the pit, I wasn't the failure, I wasn't the loss. I am Alaina G. Levine. I am in a pit of despair. I will aim to remove myself from the pit. I will aim to claw myself out of the pit. That meant that I had to engage in self-care. And if you're in the team environment, in team care. I had to do one thing a day that showed me that I was making progress. In my deepest, darkest black hole experiences, it meant that I would note that when I took a shower, that I could say I took a shower today, that I made my bed today. When I was in my deepest, darkest pandemic depression last year, that was also part of my list. That I got up, I took a shower, I made my bed, I read my email for 15 minutes. I will not lose myself. Number 4, this is not a license to ignore the system's fundamental parameters or your needs or your team's needs. In other words, this is not a license to go not so crazy, bat crazy, because I am grieving this loss, because I feel I have experienced this failure. Number 5, I will do my best, and I will know that I am doing my best in the moment. And you know what? If I'm unable to do my best in this 1 minute time frame, I will aim to do my best in the next time frame. If I am unable to get out of the chair right now because I am hysterically crying because I have applied for 20 jobs this year and got 0 offers, in this moment, I will cry. I will give myself the space to cry. But I will remember who myself and who I am, and I will aim in the next minute to get up and get something nutritious to eat. I will, number 6, keep a goal to always keep moving forward. This is something my mother wrote. I found it in her notes after she died. I must always have a goal or I will not be advancing. That was the gist of what she wrote to me. And I think about that. Always have a goal. To improve, to recover, to discover, to prep, to cushion, to move forward. Number 7, I will always remember my training. I will remember what I have been doing. In my case, I used my mathematical background to develop a series of rules, these rules that in my case acted like an equation. X plus Y plus Z equals relief from grief, relief from sadness, recovery from the loss, recovery from a professional failure. That was my training in terms of thinking like equations. What does your training and education in astronomy and cosmology and astrophysics research give you? What does it enable you to do? Number 8, I had to think very strongly about this. I will not become a victim. I am a victor. I am a triumph. I am a problem solver. And yes, I had this failure. Yes, I've had this loss. But I am not the victim. I will become the victor even if I don't feel it right now. I will, number 9, not use failure as the identity. I'm not going to pity myself just because I didn't get all these jobs. I'm going to think, what can I do differently, better, or more? Maybe I need to improve my marketing. Maybe I need to improve my communication. Maybe I need to expand my networking and look for hidden jobs. Maybe I'm not effectively articulating what it is I can do for these universities. Maybe I'm not doing enough self-promotional opportunities like speaking and writing and mentoring people. I will not use failure as an identity or a license to brand myself as someone to be pitied by myself or by anyone else. Number 10, the failure will trick you into believing that fake news about yourself and your team. Your job is to stay in the data, stay in the truth. We deal in truth, you and I. Number 11, you will make mistakes and perhaps not achieve the goal again. And that's part of being a human. I'm going to own that. I'm going to even smile sometimes because number 12, I'm going to look for lessons in every step of the failure. So that number 13, I can emerge as a continued triumph, trained and ready to take on the next big challenge. As a runner in Tucson, Arizona, where I live, there are many hills. Almost every run that I run on is a hill. And sometimes I can run up those hills triumphantly in my mind, strong, happy, smiling, listening to music, dancing. Sometimes I jog up those hills. Sometimes I walk up those hills. Sometimes I limp up those hills. Sometimes I crawl up those hills. Sometimes I crawl backwards up those hills, hysterically crying. But here's the thing. I take a step forward. I have a goal. I'm going to get up that hill. Or maybe more closely, my goal is to take the next step. Maybe more closely, my goal is to smile when I take that step, to remind myself that I am in the power position here. You are in the power position. You are in control. That's why I say you are the triumph. And just because the outside world you interact with the outside world and there is a failure, it does not reflect on who you are as a person. What I have noticed about failure is that it changes my perspective. It also changes how I view success and my priorities. Many years ago, I thought that I would be really good working for management consulting companies like McKinsey. And I applied for positions and I wasn't even getting an interview and I started to feel like a failure. But then I did some research about how the company operates and I realized the company McKinsey and more broadly other management consulting companies are ecosystems that are not aligned with my own priorities. They're certainly not aligned with my goals in terms of not just the way I do my professional work, but perhaps more importantly, the way I value my personal life, the time that I know is important for me to be able to relax, to run, to be able to do my outside non-work hobbies. I would not be able to engage in that if I was working for a management consulting company. And thus my holistic life would be poorer for that. And so I started to realize it's not that I'm failing because I can't get into McKinsey or a management consulting company. No, it's not a failure. It's actually an opportunity for me to think and realize this is not the ecosystem where I would thrive. Now I'm going to be creative. Now I'm going to be looking and be more holistic and look for ecosystems where I will thrive and not waste my time over here. What I've noticed also is that you may view failure very differently than the publics, than the people around you. And that's okay too. But failure can help you not be afraid of failure or success. Because if you see that you failed here, you will see that you can go for something even higher without being afraid, what if I fail? And what if you do fail? Who cares? You just get back on the horse and get on and do it again. Do it differently, better, or more. So love your failures. Love your failures. Always aiming to discover what do you learn differently about yourself, about your knowledge, your experience, your perception of systems and people and ecosystems, your perception of how you solve problems, about how you communicate your abilities, about your team building and team interaction activities and your ability to lead. And when your team fails, you can help them process failure with the same grieving rules that I have been talking about. But they should know that you will be supporting them so that they have a license to fail as long as they learn from that failure. So you have to give them that safe harbor to fail. And I think it's relevant to even have grieving rules that are truly articulated to your team, like even written down somewhere or even verbalized on the first day of work, on the first day if you're a PI and you have a team of postdocs and graduate students, to be able to say, these are the rules of failure, of grieving loss in our team. And we will stick by these rules so that there's no baggage left. Only new data can be collected, only lessons. Now, I want to just clarify, as I mentioned earlier, but let's take a quick deep dive on this. Failing is not necessarily your fault. Yes, there's always things we can do differently, better, or more. But there's also situations where failing is 100% not our fault. like what we've experienced with the pandemic and what we've experienced when we've experienced sexism, racism, ableism, ageism, transphobia, homophobia, sizeism, and any other ism that you can think of. So I just want you to know that you can still emerge as a triumph if you recognize that the failure does not define you. So beware what I call the zombies, haters, pigs, and jerks. That's the 4 classifications of creatures that you may interact with when you're successful and when you're failing, but especially when you're failing. And I wrote an article about that. And Diane, if you don't mind, please throwing that article in the chat. It's actually called Beware the Zombies, Haters, Pigs, and Jerks. Another time that failing may not be your fault is when the system breaks down, when there's acts of God, there's a hurricane, there's a typhoon, so forth. There might be unknowable or undetectable information. And my point to you is to remember that you won't be in control of everything in every system or project, nor will you know every single piece of data. So how do you protect yourself from failure? Acknowledge that it might happen anyway. Learn from the previous failure. Identify and manage your expectations. Create that grieving rules process. And for teams, communicate and clarify that failure will happen, it can happen, and we need to learn from it. By creating that structure now, people will be more apt to take innovative leaps, which can lead to great creative advances in our field. In summary, failures, in other words, people who fail, I would never call you a failure, but some people use that word to describe people, failures. Well, who are actually the failures? We are the innovators, the inventors, the influencers, the entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs, the disruptors, the world changers, the doers, the thinkers, the designers, the mentors, and the next gen leaders. In other words, the failures are the successes. You are the ones who are going to change the world for the better. You are the ones who are going to elucidate corners of the universe that we didn't even know existed because of your willingness to fail, to learn from the failure and to move beyond it. Recognize that no innovation or solution was ever initiated or invented or instituted in a failure-free zone. Every innovation is tied to a failure that happened before. So learn from your failures, embrace them and grow from them, and emerge from your own mind as a winner every single time so that you can get ready to take on the next challenge, the higher, more high-stake environment, the more high-stake challenge, and the higher hill. This is a picture of me about 3 months later at another half marathon. I did not come in last, but who cares if I did anyway? I had fun, check. I finished, check. And I did it with a smile on my face. And yes, I did run hills in that race. And I emerged happy, proud of myself, knowing that I had this loss, this failure, quote unquote, before, and it allowed me to be stronger this time. What are you going to be stronger for next time? That's my question to you. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to spend some time with you to think about failures. As I want to remind you again, this webinar was recorded and you are welcome to continue taking photographs, screenshots, tweeting, and please join me on LinkedIn. I see we have a question and I want to be able to answer this question. If you have other questions, throw it in the Q&A. I'm going to stick around for a few more moments if any of the questions come in. So we have this question. How much should we attach ourselves to or define ourselves by goals? My experience with failure tells me it is much easier to accept it when I'm not deeply attached to a goal. So I really appreciate you asking that question. I think it's very important, particularly right now in history, because this time last year, when I was getting ready for a year of in-person speaking gigs, including what I consider to be one of my most exciting gigs, which was going to Tokyo to speak at the University of Tokyo, I was really upset when it was all canceled. And I had to recombobulate. I discombobulated and then I had to recombobulate and reconstitute to think about what were my goals for the year. I had to shift my expectations for myself. And this really gave me the ability to be more creative in how I delivered value to my customers, to the people who were employing me, to my network, to my colleagues, to my collaborators. So I think your point, Leonardo, about that failure, you said my experience with failure tells me it is much easier to accept it when I'm not deeply attached to a goal. I think the idea is, if we can, I think it's important to identify goals, both a holistic goal and day-to-day, week-to-week, and month-to-month, and even year-to-year goals for ourselves. I find that helps me to move forward. It also helps me to track my progress. I really am a huge believer and a huge proponent of identifying and tracking goals. But I'm also going to recognize I'm a human, and my expectations will change because the system's parameters are going to change as I move forward in time. As I move forward in time and space, the system is changing. It's a dynamic system. I'm dynamic in it as well. It's both complex. Both myself is a complex system, and the system itself is complex, both interacting and impacting each other. So I'm going to recognize that my expectations will change, the goal will change as new information comes in, as the system changes, and I have the right as a human to adjust my goal accordingly. And I think that that's totally fine. And just like with me, when I realized that McKinsey and management consulting companies were not going to be right for me, I adjusted my goal. That doesn't mean I failed at that previous goal. It means that I am an astute human, that I recognize that I will change, and I can change, and I should change, and change my metrics of success, change my ability to observe and impact and take data from the community and the system in which I operate and perceive that system, and change the way I can add value to that system. So I think it is a lot about perspective. So I thank you for the question. We have another great question. Is there another way? Oh, Michael, you asked this great question. Good point. Is there a way for me to sign up or apply for career advice? So I'm glad you asked that, Michael. Diane is writing right now. So we have an opportunity. And Diane, if you could throw this into the chat also, the link. The AAS is offering for career planning resource, career consultations 101 with me that you can book. They are private and confidential. I do not report back to AAS what you and I will discuss. You can book these. They're $20 for 20 minutes, and you can book, I think, up to 5 20-minute spots. And Diane, you're going to put Diane will put there, she put it in. There's the link for you to sign up for those, and I'm happy to meet with you. And if you have any other questions about how I can help you with your career, I am here to answer those for you. I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to leave you for today, but I want to thank you all so much again for this opportunity. It wasn't perfect, my delivery, but I may, in some cases, some people might have said I even failed in my webinar today because it wasn't perfect, but I'm not going to say that. I'm going to perceive it and frame it differently in my mind. I did my best. I delivered the information I wanted to deliver. I had fun, and I finished. And shouldn't we all benefit when we think about our successes and our failures that way too? So I wish you all the best in your career, and I thank you again for this opportunity.